Imagine yourself as a new Russian recruit, someone who signed up because the government tempted you with a contract offering more money than you had ever imagined earning. It might seem like a promising deal. If the military can pay this much, surely it can equip you properly when you eventually deploy to Ukraine. But within weeks of signing, you are already on your way to the front, only to discover that the essential equipment you expected simply does not exist. Russian troops are learning quickly that their country cannot provide what they need to be anything more than cannon fodder in Ukraine. Soldiers are going into battle practically unprotected because Russia has run out of armor. The combination of dwindling supplies and the government's disregard for its soldiers' survival lies at the heart of this issue, as reported by The Telegraph on November 29th. The article details how images of Russian soldiers without helmets, body armor, or even basic load-bearing vests being hunted by Ukrainian drones are becoming common, especially near Lyman. Igor Komok, deputy commander of Ukraine's 2nd Mechanized Battalion, says these scenes have become frequent, noting that this trend only began recently on that front. Compared to last year, when such cases were rare, this shift is surprising, especially given Lyman's former importance to Putin. Lyman, located in the Donbas region, was one of the first significant cities captured by Russia during the early months of Putin's so-called special military operation. By late May 2022, Russian forces had increased pressure on the Donbas enough to occupy Lyman. At the time, DW reported that its capture provided Russia with a strategic position from which to launch further assaults on Sloviansk. Since Putin has long wanted to claim the entire Donbas as Russian territory, Lyman was once a top priority, but Russia lost control of the city in October 2022, as The Guardian reported, retreating in the face of advancing Ukrainian troops, raising their national flag. Putin was humiliated, and to this day Russian forces have failed to recapture the city. Their efforts have been so ineffective that UNN reported Russia attempting to bypass Lyman entirely, an attempt that ultimately failed. Frustrated by the ongoing failure to retake a city they once held, Russia is now throwing unarmored men into repeated assaults on Lyman. Footage circulating across social media, including a 94-second compilation shared on X, confirms Komok's account. The videos show Russian soldiers with no protective gear attempting to conduct the very kinds of assaults Putin demands. These men hide when they can, only to bolt the moment they spot a Ukrainian drone overhead, revealing how badly they have been abandoned by their own government. Many wear nothing more than basic fatigues which provide no protection from bullets or kamikaze drones. Much of the footage is too graphic for YouTube, showing unequipped soldiers with no chance of survival facing Ukrainian drones. The Telegraph also reports that Ukraine's 66th Brigade has shared images of at least 6 Russian soldiers killed while wearing no armor at all. Statistics paint an equally grim picture. According to Komok, Russian forces wore helmets in only 4 out of the last 20 assault groups, meaning just 1 in 5 soldiers had even minimal protective gear during Lyman assaults. In the final days of November alone, the city endured several dozen attacks, demonstrating that Russia is employing manpower as expendable cannon fodder rather than using coherent military tactics. Why is this happening if Lyman is so important to Russia's plans? Putin wants to conquer the entire Donbas, leading Russia to launch dozens of assaults weekly, according to Komok. So why send soldiers into battle without even basic protection? Several explanations exist. The most obvious is that Russia's devastating losses have created a severe equipment shortage. Dmitry Zmylo, director of Ukraine's Security and Cooperation Center, explains that the lack of gear is an adaptation to conditions where Russian forces suffer extremely high daily losses in relentless meat grinder assaults. In truth, Russia is facing dire financial constraints that limit its ability to equip its troops. Forbes reported on October 3rd that Russia is running out of money to pay its soldiers. With the war funded largely by oil and gas revenues and reserves being drained, Russia is struggling to continue offering massive sign-up bonuses and monthly salaries that consume nearly 10% of federal spending. These costs are unsustainable, meaning that money which should go toward equipment is instead spent on wages paid only for however long the soldier survives. Combined financial and logistical issues are driving Russia to rely on mass infantry assaults carried out under poor operational conditions, as United 24 noted. The Kyiv Independent also questioned whether Russia is running out of money to sustain the invasion, pointing out that Russia has run a deficit exceeding 2% for 7 straight years and has drained its national wealth fund to levels far below its expected deficits. Russia is experiencing a financial crisis, and its collapsing economy is one major reason why its troops lack adequate protection. But the equipment crisis is not limited to Lyman. Across Ukraine, Russian troops lack basic supplies required to carry out the tasks Putin assigns them. An intercepted call reported by the Kiev Post in September revealed that frontline soldiers receive no gas canisters and are issued only canned meat, grains, and cigarettes. Everything else must be purchased personally or sent from home. Soldiers are crowdfunding their own equipment, and many die attempting to retrieve supplies when they occasionally become available. This has been a persistent issue since the early days of the invasion. In May 2022, the Moscow Times reported that Russian soldiers were forced to buy their own uniforms, as even jackets and trousers were not provided. In October 2022, The Guardian shared complaints from new conscripts receiving absolutely nothing from the army, not even basic gear, leaving some to paint their own rusty guns. Fortune also reported on soldiers living in filthy conditions with shortages of food and medicine. Thus, while Russia's financial collapse is partly responsible for the lack of armor, another factor has been consistent since the start of the invasion: Putin's disregard for his soldiers. Russia could choose to provide appropriate gear, but even when it can, it often does not, because Putin does not care whether his troops survive. His attitude was clear decades ago, beginning with the Kursk submarine disaster in August 2000, when all 118 crew members died. Putin refused foreign assistance, prioritizing secrecy and pride over the sailors' lives. By the time he accepted help, it was too late. His behavior during that tragedy foreshadowed how he treats Russia's military today. After 25 years in power, Putin has grown even more ruthless and single-minded. Zmilo notes that for Russian commanders, soldiers are expendable resources meant to absorb Ukrainian ammunition. Exhausted units sustain heavy losses due to constant assaults, yet the leadership demands battlefield results, regardless of cost. To Putin, a soldier and a helmet are merely items with price tags, money spent in pursuit of territorial conquest. Why invest in gear when the state already paid tens of thousands of dollars to secure each new recruit? Russia's staggering casualty numbers reflect this disposable view of its troops. According to Minfin.ua, Russia has suffered over 1,172,860 casualties since the invasion began, more than 23 times the losses Russia sustained in 10 years of war in Afghanistan. Putin believes more soldiers can always be found, and his actions demonstrate this belief clearly. Reports show Russia recruiting those with severe health conditions, including cardiac illnesses, endocrine disorders, and even sexually transmitted infections such as syphilis. Elderly men are also being sent into combat, despite having little chance of survival. Fortune shockingly reports that the Kremlin has even given literal meat grinders as condolences to families of fallen soldiers, either an outrageously insensitive gesture or a dark, deliberate message. But beyond the lack of equipment and indifference to survival lies an even more disturbing practice: zeroing. This brutal punishment involves sending soldiers, often wounded or guilty of trivial infractions, into battle without armor or even weapons. Zmilo explains that soldiers with minor violations, such as carrying the wrong amount of water or wearing unauthorized patches, may be arrested and sent into suicidal assault groups. Komok adds that Russian commanders sometimes deceive their troops by insisting they face no Ukrainian forces, only for them to unknowingly walk into lethal ambushes that expose Ukrainian firing positions. Whether as punishment or reconnaissance sacrifice, these soldiers are treated as disposable tools. Russia's challenges in Lyman reflect broader systemic issues. Equipment shortages have persisted from the start, but even more significant is Putin's belief that soldiers exist solely as fuel for the meat grinder he created. How long he can continue sacrificing thousands every month remains uncertain, but such tactics will not help him capture Lyman. When you combine Russia's refusal or inability to provide armor with deep tactical incompetence, you create a military force easily trapped by Ukraine's strategies, an outcome seen clearly in late November in the besieged town of Minara, where Russia thought it was gaining ground until Ukraine's F-16 intervention. To understand the next phase of Russia's growing equipment crisis, viewers are encouraged to subscribe to the Military Show.